Hey guys, I wanted to jump on and talk to you, just kind of a somber moment, I feel like, just about some, a horrible thing that happened in Palmdale last week, and it's been in the news, and we're talking about it yesterday, and the conversation's kind of revived, and has to do with really a horror. A man was found hung in our city square, Ponce Square, and, on one side, people are saying, well, it was a suicide, and on the other side, people are saying, well, it's not a suicide. It's actually it was actually a lynching, an old school kind of KKK style lynching, and it's causing a lot of unrest, I feel like, in our city, and it's being paired with a number of other really tragic events of just of days of late, and really, I mean, not entirely new things, which adds, I think, to the horror of the sort of thing. I want to address the issue a little bit because, there's a lot of people that are saying that, all the race conversations that are going on about systemic racism and everything else, that it's not even real, that it's being manufactured by media, a lot of conservative voices saying it's being manufactured by liberal media because, and being leveraged for political purposes, and where I think that, just reflecting on the sinfulness of human hearts, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure there are people and groups that are leveraging the pain and hurt of others for political purposes. But I in no way see that as evidence that systemic racism doesn't actually exist in our society. I find it to be kind of ludicrous, and I'll give you an example of it. The issue at hand is that the police right now are doing their investigation, and what everybody's saying is that it doesn't matter what they find, right? That if the police come back and they say it was indeed a lynching, we have tied it to this group or this individual or something like that. If it comes back that way, then everyone's going to say, see, this is evidence that there's there's more than just systemic racism, but wide scale persecution going on. On the other hand, if the investigation comes back and they say, well, no, we determined it was a suicide. I want to make two observations about that conclusion. One, the vast majority of the community is going to say it was a police cover-up. And that right there is evidence that by and large our community has experienced racism on a wide scale, or at least what they perceive to be racism on a wide scale. And if that's not by definition systemic racism, then I'm not really sure what is, right? When I say systemic racism, I don't mean that everybody's a racist. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying that our systems perpetuate and in some ways function in and around racism, and they do. The other observation I want to make is if it was a suicide, I would have a hard time believing that if somebody committed suicide, if it was indeed a suicide, which is horrible, I can't even imagine the pain that man must have felt that would cause him to do such a thing. But if it was a suicide, it was more than a suicide, it was a political statement, because one doesn't usually, just because of personal emotional issues, hang themselves in the town square. That's usually something that is, done in a locked bedroom. And so, regardless of how this thing turns out, it's evidence that we have a problem in our society, with the way that we see race as a whole. As a whole, our society needs to look at race different, and that's why we call it systemic racism, because it's widespread. It's a system issue, and it's just horrible. This whole event, either way. What's interesting is if we look at sort of moral conservatives and what they're saying at systemic racism and the issues at hand and demanding and then what moral liberals are saying. I'm actually finding right now that using those terms, moral conservatives and moral liberals aren't really good terms. Like they aren't self-defining. If you think about what the terms mean, a moral conservative is somebody who wants to conserve traditional morality. A moral liberal is somebody who wants to take liberty with morality, with traditional morality. And I don't know that ever our society has on a wide scale said, yeah, we value the decimation of an entire category of people in our society, right? We call that genocide. It's, when we've literally fought wars over it, right? And so, like, our society doesn't value that. And if you put it in the right terms and you think about it, like, really what we're dealing with is everybody's a moral conservative right now. Everybody is a moral conservative. Nobody wants systemic racism in our society. I mean, maybe a couple of people, but on a widespread basis, most of our society does not want to see that. What we're actually dealing with is a division on the conservative and liberal side of how we define what's happening, and a division on what we believe is actually happening. And that's the difference between sort of, we're going to stereotype the liberal and conservative crowds. That's the difference we're dealing with. I want to give you sort of an illustration of this, and I'm kind of speaking to the moral conservatives here in some ways, but like, moral conservatives are known to be against abortion, right? And so, well, why? Because it's the abortion, and morally is the legalization of the killing of an entire category of the people in our society, right? And if you look at Immanuel Kant's universalistic theory, that it's his moral theory that says, well, if you take and you apply a principle society wide, does it affect the productivity of that society? Does it allow the society to grow, or does it hurt the society? And he looked at the issue of abortion in his day, and he said, well, abortion must be wrong because if we kill all babies, right, if we kill all unborn children, that will negatively affect our society. And so he said, for that reason, it's wrong, right? But that's what abortion is it's the legalization of the killing of an entire portion of society. And it's kind of interesting because, like literally, if we had a bill pass in the Senate or something that says, okay, hey, you know what? Let's take a different subset of society, and let's say it's now legal to kill women, and like, you can just kill women, like you can kill, an ant on the sidewalk. Now it's totally legal. Like, literally, our nation would rise up in civil unrest and probably literally in civil war to overthrow a government that would be so wicked, right? And so that's why moral conservatives get so hot, because of the issue of abortion, because that's how they see it. Literally, you might as well be telling a moral conservative that that we're gonna do away completely with a different any category of society. We're gonna make it legal to kill women. We're gonna make it legal to kill elderly or whatever. Like, and it's just an atrocity. And so that's the way that the moral conservative thinks. Well, I don't see why it's any different. Like, not that anybody, in the moral conservative world thinks that we should pass a law that it's okay to kill black men. But we should probably have that kind of unrest. Like, we can't just look the other way and go, oh, black men are dying. I guess, that's normal, right? You can't just look at it that way, right? It doesn't fit the values of the moral conservative system, right? And what's really interesting there is that's a value that the morally, supposedly liberal group has, right? Moral liberals are saying, no, we need to protect life, right? And this is why I personally don't like to jump into these political categories, because, look, we need to protect life and people who are imagers of God and, valuable in His eyes. And, I've kind of got this paraphrase of Galatians 3:28 and 29 up on my screen that says, there's no ethnic distinctions, and all are free because we are all one in Christ Jesus. If we belong to Christ, then we are equal heirs according to God's promise. Look, God's not discriminating by race or gender or age or anything else in who he values and loves, right? It's you belong to Jesus or you don't. You follow Jesus or you don't. And it has nothing to do with anything, biological or sociological or anthropological or ethical or ethnic in us, right? It's nothing to do with that. And so we should be exactly as up in arms about this issue of systemic racism, especially when lives are being lost, as we are when it's women being persecuted or children being persecuted or genocide in some other country, right? Why do we go to war over that? But we won't deal with systemic racism right here at home. Like, what's that about? It's a disconnect, and I really think at the end of the day, when we look at core values of the different political groups, we are arguing over different solutions, and I think that's fair. But we all want a solution to the same problem. So let's stop saying it's not a problem. Let's look. I want to kind of think philosophically and just reflect on some of the historical ways of dealing with these sorts of issues. And I'm going to tell you up front, thousands of years of philosophy does not provide us with a perfect solution. And I'm hearing really two voices out there, and they're both very imperfect. And I don't have the right solution, and I'll tell you why I don't think I have the right solution in a minute. But I don't have the right solution. But I want you to understand the two solutions, the two major categories of solutions that are out there, so that you understand people who oppose your views. Let's talk about the first one. The first one is the colorblind solution. And this is people who want to say, well, I'm colorblind. I don't judge anybody because of the color of their skin. I don't even see the color of their skin, right? And this sort of thinking goes back to philosophical utilitarianism and the idea that what's best for society has nothing to do with who your tribe or your people are, right? It's we have to look past our own cultural identity, and we need to look past of our own families and our familial values, and we need to look to what's actually best for the world. What way of thinking and treating people, and what political system preserves life for the most people the most of the time, right? And this is actually something that's been utilized by the Roman Empire is famous for this. They called it Hellenization, but Babylon did this, and the ancient Greeks did this to a degree, and the Persian Empire did this to a degree. But yeah, so it's called Hellenization. It's the idea that that when you're going throughout the world and you're conquering all these nations and stuff, and they did a lot of different things, dislocating people to other, guess what, you're picking up and you're going to live in this other city now. And they would forced people to mix cultures, and they set up intentionally in these large cities with diverse marketplaces, and so that people would trade goods with people they otherwise wouldn't have known. And what they were kind of doing is very similar to what today is called whitewashing, right? So they weren't actually allowing people, or at least it's not that they weren't allowing people to maintain their cultural identity, but they were making it very difficult for people to maintain cultural identity. And what they were intentionally doing is trying to mix people to the degree that you couldn't tell between, we'll just say, to use Paul's words in Galatians 3, you couldn't differentiate between Jew and Greek, right? That's what they wanted. Because if we can get everybody to sort of have a common culture, then everybody's going to have common values, and everybody's going to get along, right? So that's the philosophical utilitarianism that we've seen literally over thousands of years of history. And when people say, well, I'm colorblind, and we just need to be colorblind, and we need to see past, honestly, I gotta be honest with you guys. What you're saying is you want black people to act like white people, and you're saying you want Hispanic people to act like white people, and I can identify with that a little bit, because I was raised in a sort of a culturally Caucasian culture because I wasn't raised around. My last name is Delgado, right? And so I am half Hispanic, but I wasn't raised around Hispanic family. And so now when I am around Hispanic family, I do definitely feel like I'm sort of missing a piece of who I am, right? And I'm very interested in their culture and things of that sort, right? And it does a bit offend me to say that I shouldn't even be, like, I don't even have that culture, but it does offend me a little bit to think that, you know, a large segment of our society thinks that the solution to systemic racism is to actually wash away culture. And again, what we are saying, if we say everybody needs to be colorblind, what we're actually saying is everybody needs to act and value what white people act and like and value. That's really silly, right? It's really silly because the only reason we have different values is because, sort of, as you trace anthropologically, you know, people groups back throughout history, it's because we grew up, you know, our ancestors grew up in different places in the world where you needed to do different things to survive, and all of that has developed over long periods of time into beautiful and diverse cultures. And how dare any of us suggest that, you know, we get rid of world cultures? I mean, that's what you're saying when you say we all need to be colorblind, is like, let's just get rid of all ethnic identity, let's get rid of all world cultures and all of the beauty that God's created in this creation and the diversity of people, and let's just get rid of all that and treat everybody the same, and everybody have the same values and the same culture, and we'll just all be happy and eat cheeseburgers for the rest of human civilization. I think we all realize how kind of stupid that is. Like, anybody who likes to travel knows how ridiculous that is. Why would you travel? To go somewhere else and experience something that's beautiful and diverse and different than what you already know. Like, we don't want to be colorblind. It's not a solution to this. And in fact, just go read some world history. It's been a horrific solution for the people groups that were forced into this way of thinking, this way of civilization, this philosophical utilitarianism. We don't want to do that. And the other solution that's come about is kind of the opposite of colorblindness, and what it sometimes referred to, I've heard, is referred to as ethnic cooperation. And this means that ethnic groups ought to see and notice that they are different, right? And you know, so sort of when you study world missions, and I've been on a few missions trips, you're taught something more like ethnic cooperation, where you want to honor the cultures of the people that you're visiting, and without, like, but you offend them if you pretend that you have the same culture as them, right? So it's sort of a dance you have to play. You want to honor them by living the way that they live. And you know, if they want to honor you in a way that's appropriate in their culture, then you accept that. Otherwise you offend them, right? So you don't say, well, I don't want to eat that, or this is where you want me to sleep, right? When they're actually doing something that in their culture was for the purpose of honoring you, right? And so that's ethnic cooperation. And you know, I think the problem with ethnic cooperation is that it breeds, I mean, it sounds like a good solution, doesn't it? Like if we can acknowledge our cultural and ethnic differences in order to maintain the beauty of diversity, then that's right on. That's got to be the answer. And I think it's closer to the answer than the utilitarian response. But I want to think about why why you choose to have the cultural values that you do, right? You value what you value because they are the values that you think are best for you and best for society, right? You take your values to the polling booth when you vote, right? You do not want to keep, I don't care what you think, like, unless you're not voting because you just don't care, you do not want to keep your values to yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't vote, right? Or your vote would be just because you find you would only vote for things that threaten your ability to maintain your own personal values, right? So you might go vote against a law that was going to make one of your values illegal in some way, right? But you wouldn't worry about what other people value, right? You wouldn't be worried about society and you wouldn't be worried about politics, right? So by default, human beings do want their values, whether you realize it or not, to you value it, you think it's good for you, and so you want to cast that onto other people, right? And so, that's going to cause, so ethnic cooperation is only really possible under a very unbelievable amount of humility, right? Like an inhuman amount of humility. Like, most of us don't have that level of self-actualization to even know that we're projecting our value system onto somebody else in a way that's offensive to them. Like, we just don't even realize that. Like, and that's the problem with ethnic cooperation, is it sounds like a really good thing. Like we can get along. Like, I can have Hispanic friends, and I can have African American friends, and I can have Asian American friends, and so on and so forth. And like we can be bros. Like, we can do whatever, right? And I actually think that's true and beautiful and right to think that way. But I think we need to have the humility to admit that we're still sinful humans at heart, and we don't even see all the ways that our sinfulness is coming out in the things that we say, in the things that we value, in the ways that we vote, and you think you're posting something encouraging or clever or intelligent on social media, and then all of a sudden, people are up in arms about it, and it's like, well, how did that even happen? I you don't understand. I love everybody, and I want to honor every culture, and then all of a sudden, you're the one who looks like a racist because you didn't even realize what you were insinuating, or the way that others from their cultural perspective might see it. And so, where I think ethnic cooperation is sort of it's a good goal, right? Like, I'm not interested in living in a completely whitewashed culture that's philosophical utilitarianism. I mean, that's kind of what Hitler was after, right? So I'm not interested in that. I do love the idea of maintaining that God-given uniqueness that's in these cultures that have developed over thousands and thousands of years. I don't want to overwrite that, but I don't know if any human being has the ability to be so self-actualized and also humble enough to fully operate under that paradigm all of the time. And so ethnic cooperation, if we lean into that perspective, we're going to still see racism come up. And that's where I'm getting with this. Like, I don't believe it has to be systemic racism, but I don't think we're ever going to be rid of racism unless we go the utilitarian route. But I'm not interested in that, and I don't think you are either. And so we do the ethnic cooperation route, but we can't be fully rid of racism within the ethnic cooperation route. So what do, right? And so, there's no perfect solutions. In fact, the only things there are imperfect solutions. And that's why, and there's been a lot of criticism from people who say, well, you can't help what, because you've got people, protesting, right? And I think protesting is, I think it's great. I actually think it's done some work. It's definitely drawn attention to this issue within our society that's really just been a latent issue. It's been, it's not new. It's not new. It was here last year. It was exactly the same as it is today last year. But it's in our face a little bit more today, and we're having the conversation today, and I think it's right and it's good, and with everybody sitting around at home, not that let's take the time to have the conversation, right? And so, but anyway, this has been undergone a lot of criticism. This idea that you can't help other people, but you can help the way that you act and the way that you treat others. You can't change the world, you can't change society, but you can make sure that you change yourself. I think it's an imperfect solution, but I think it's true. And I do think things like peaceful protesting and can be really helpful. And nobody sure, whatever, call me if you have a problem with that, and we'll have the conversation. But our government is set up to allow for that, by the way. It's part of our freedom in the country we live in that we get to do that. So, again, as long as it's peaceful, we have no right to destroy the property of another human being. Or the life for that matter, even more significantly. But peaceful protesting, dude, I just don't see how you can be against that. So let's talk about this imperfect solution, though, that we can do. So I do think as individuals, we should participate peacefully in protest. Okay, so I think you can do a lot more protesting. I haven't got to go to one of the actual protests myself. It's bizarre how they end it. It's like I have like work meetings and stuff online on every time one of them has come up in our area, and I really wanted to do one here in Palmdale, but I didn't get to. But in a way, I think that like this video and different things that I've posted on Facebook and Instagram and on and through other social media channels, I think these are peaceful protests, right? That when we're like willing to have a conversation, that's a peaceful protest. Now, I don't think a peaceful protest is getting online and having irrational and angry arguments. So a lot of people are posting things online that like I don't even want to comment on because it's really obvious that they're so set in their way that I'm just getting into a yelling match if I even engage somebody, and even if it's just a all caps Facebook comments yelling match, I don't want to do that. Like I make sure that your protesting is in fact peaceful. I think prayer is the answer to this, and I want to give you a guide for prayer in a minute because but I think prayer is an answer to this. We don't have a perfect solution because we live in an imperfect world. And so if we live in an imperfect world, sorry, I had to reach awkwardly for my Bible there. We live in this imperfect world, and it's like we need to go to the perfect if we want answers for the imperfect. Like there's a reason that humanity over millennia have not been able to fix this issue. And that reason is because humans are imperfect. Like, I'm just sorry, we are imperfect. We are not a perfect creation of God. We are, in fact, tainted by sin. And the biblical language that is that we're under a curse because of sin. And we look at Adam and Eve in the garden and we see like what to some people is just a silly story about a snake and fruit. But what we see is Adam and Eve break God's law, and that is supposed to incite in our hearts like, you know what? There are basic, simple realities like treating other people like human beings that sometimes we don't do. Right? And that story of Adam and Eve is supposed to incite in us not complicated theological and philosophical arguments over morality. It's just supposed to make us go, you know what? I'm like that too. Sometimes I do things that I know flat out are wrong. They're wrong for humanity. They're wrong for this world. They're wrong in God's eyes. Like just flat out wrong. And it's because we're humans. And if you want a solution to this, you need to go to the one who's not human. Right? You need to go to God, the one who does have the perfect morality, and he does understand the way that it works. And you go to that God in prayer when you want that kind of peace. And honestly, I just think we need to resolve in our hearts to think and act right. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you just spout off with something, and you're like, why did I say that? And we just need to make a commitment. Too many of us are walking around going, well, it's just who I am. It's how God created me to be. And it's like, no, God doesn't want you to be a jerk, right? So, or a racist or anything like that. Like that's not an excuse. Like just that's the way that God created me, or it's the way that I am. Like we don't allow, serial killers to go, well, I'm sorry, I've got this, this psychosis and it's just who God created me to be, so I'm gonna go get my knife. And we don't allow that. So why do we allow people to go around being racist? Why do we allow ourselves to deal with things like anger and just those kinds of attitudes? It's so antithetical. It doesn't make any sense. Choose to think and act right, even when others don't. You know what I mean? Like even when people in your, so to speak, tribe, right? Your group, your ethnic circle, or your, I use the word tribe because it's kind of become a political term. Like when people in your political circle maybe, when they're acting different and you know that's not right, why don't you be the voice, right? Right? I can't speak into somebody else's tribe in the way I can speak into my tribe. You know what I'm saying? So why don't you be the voice? Why don't you resolve to think and act right, and don't go get into big arguments with the other the other groups. Why don't you just go start thinking and acting right yourself and see if you can get some of your tribe to think and act right with you. You know what I mean? This morning I was on Facebook, and there was a post I saw from a fellow believer, and he said, hey, well, we're in the face of all of this racial tension and these types of issues, will you resolve to pray Psalm 51 with me? And I thought that was a really cool request. Will you resolve to pray Psalm 51 with me? And if you know Psalm 51, you know that this is not a psalm about the world. This is not a psalm about... It's not a psalm about racism. It's a psalm about the hearts of human men and women. It's about your heart, right? And so I'm just going to read this for you, and then I'm going to play a song that is literally Psalm 51, so that you can just spend some personal time in reflection, and we'll just let this be our prayer for today. A Psalm of David. Have mercy on me, O God. According to your steadfast love and according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions, blot out my sins, blot out my false thinking. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin, for I know my transgressions. I know that my sin is forever before me. Against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be made clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear your joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways. I will teach the false thinkers God's ways, and sinners will return to you. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of your righteousness. Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. For you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. God, you will not despise. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then will you delight in right sacrifices and burnt offerings, and the whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered at your altar. Amen.
Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Have mercy The sacrifices of our God are a broken and a contrite heart. Against you and you alone have I sinned. The sacrifices of our God are a broken and a contrite heart. Against you and you alone have I sinned. Would you create in me a clean heart, oh God? Restore in me the joy of your salvation. Wash me white as snow, and I will be made whole. Wash me white as snow, and I will be made whole. Wash me white as snow, and I will be made whole. Wash me white as snow. Wash me white as snow, and I will be made Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great